The late afternoon sun dipped behind the roof of a modest community stadium on the outskirts of Manchester. The grass was uneven, marked by patches of brown where the ground had been worn down by countless amateur games. Plastic chairs rattled beneath the feet of restless spectators, and the smell of fried chips drifted in from a food van parked just outside the gates. It wasn't Old Trafford and it wasn't Wembley. It was just a small ground with maybe 300 people scattered across the stands, gathered for a local charity match that would barely make the back page of tomorrow's papers. Yet on this day, in this modest place, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Wayne Rooney stood on the touchline, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his gray tracksuit, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a cap pulled too low. The crowd recognized him, of course. How could they not? The all-time leading scorer for England, the kid from Croxteth who once lit up the Premier League with goals that seemed to defy physics. But the cheers that greeted his presence were mixed with murmurs, even snickers. For every child tugging on a parent's sleeve in awe, there were two men in the back row shaking their heads. Look at him now. Thick around the waist. Past it. He looks like he doesn't even want to be here. Rooney heard them. He always heard them. He had become used to the sound of his own legacy being chipped away, not by missed goals on the pitch anymore, but by the relentless headlines off it. Drunken nights, arguments in pubs, photos splashed across tabloids. The man who once carried a nation's hopes now carried the weight of its ridicule. He shifted uncomfortably as a volunteer organizer pressed a ball into his hands and gestured for him to join the warm-up. He gave a half-hearted smile, jogged stiffly onto the field, and began passing the ball around with a group of teenagers who looked more starstruck than he felt. Then it happened. The murmurs in the stands grew louder, shifting into a ripple of recognition. Heads turned. A wave of applause started from the far corner and rolled like thunder across the small ground. Rooney frowned, confused, until he followed their gaze and saw him. David Beckham was walking toward the pitch. No fanfare, no security entourage, no pre-announced guest appearance. Just Beckham himself, dressed simply in dark jeans and a white shirt with sleeves rolled up, his familiar stride calm and assured, the sunlight catching the edges of his still golden hair. The crowd surged to its feet. Children screamed his name. Even the older spectators who had mocked Rooney only minutes earlier now clapped with genuine awe. Beckham waved once, modestly, but his eyes were scanning the field, locking onto Rooney like a compass finding true north. Rooney's stomach tightened. His instinct was to look away, to disappear beneath his cap. This was not supposed to happen. He had been promised it would be a small event, low-key, no big names, no headlines. He hadn't wanted the pressure of sharing space with a legend who seemed untouchable, forever polished and adored. Yet here Beckham was, stepping onto the same scruffy pitch, heading directly toward him. The whispers in the crowd were knives. Beckham still looks like a star, doesn't he? And Rooney, what happened to him? When Beckham reached him, the two men stood face to face. For a moment, silence spread across the stadium, as if even the air itself paused to listen. Beckham extended his hand. Rooney hesitated, then reluctantly took it. Beckham's grip was firm, steady, almost grounding. Their eyes met. Beckham's gaze wasn't one of pity or judgment. It was calm, unwavering, filled with something Rooney hadn't felt directed at him in years: respect. The whistle blew and the charity match began. Beckham, though retired for years, laced up a borrowed pair of boots and jogged lightly onto the grass, positioning himself with the same elegance that once commanded midfields around the world. Rooney shuffled into place, acutely aware of every eye fixed on the contrast between them. Each touch Beckham made drew cheers. Each heavy stride Rooney took seemed to highlight his decline. The younger players darted around, eager to impress, but all anyone seemed to care about were the two icons sharing the field again. One still glowing with aura, the other dimmed, struggling to find his spark. At one point, a loose ball rolled toward Rooney. He trapped it awkwardly, the bounce heavier than his touch. A smattering of laughter broke from a section of the stands. His cheeks burned. He was about to pass it off quickly when Beckham approached, calling for the ball with a clap of his hands. Rooney sent it toward him, expecting Beckham to carry the moment. But instead, Beckham stopped, pointed at Rooney and loudly shouted, "Run!" His voice carried across the pitch. Instinct took over before self-consciousness could interfere. Rooney sprinted forward, clumsy, unfit, but moving, and Beckham lofted the ball perfectly into his path. Rooney struck, more out of habit than conviction, and the ball skidded just wide of the post. The crowd groaned in disappointment, but Beckham jogged over, clapped Rooney on the back and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's the Wayne Rooney I know. Keep going." The words weren't extraordinary, but the tone was genuine, believing. For the first time in months, maybe years, Rooney felt a flicker of the old fire inside him. But that flicker was quickly drowned later that evening, when Rooney sat alone in the small locker room after the match. His shirt clung to his body with sweat, his legs ached, and the echoes of laughter from the stands still rang in his ears. He stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. The man looking back wasn't the teenager who had scored a wonder goal against Arsenal at 17, nor the warrior who had bled for England at Euro 2004. This man was heavier, older, with lines etched deep into his face not just by time, but by regret. A knock on the door broke the silence. Rooney turned, expecting an organizer coming to thank him, or perhaps to rush him out. Instead, Beckham stepped inside. He closed the door softly behind him, leaning casually against the wall. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of their shared history filled the room. Manchester United, England, the years when both carried the hopes of a nation. But where Beckham had walked away to applause and business empires, Rooney had stumbled into ridicule. "I didn't know you were coming," Rooney muttered, his voice low, defensive. "I didn't plan to," Beckham replied evenly. "But I heard you'd be here. Thought I should see you." Rooney scoffed, reaching for his bag. "What? To check in on the wreckage?" Beckham didn't flinch. He simply crossed the room, pulled a chair, and sat across from him. "To remind you of who you are," he said. Those words hit harder than any headline Rooney had endured. He looked up sharply, meeting Beckham's steady eyes. For a moment, he wanted to argue, to unleash all the bitterness stored in him. The betrayals of the press, the endless criticisms, the feeling of being discarded by the very sport he'd given everything to. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, what came out was a whisper, almost too quiet to hear. "I don't know who I am anymore." Beckham didn't answer right away. He just let the silence stretch, giving the confession its weight. Then, with the same calm assurance that had carried him through decades of scrutiny, he leaned forward. "You're Wayne Rooney," he said. "And that still means something. It always will." The words lingered in the air, fragile yet powerful. Rooney wanted to believe them, but belief was a muscle he hadn't exercised in years. He lowered his head, hiding the sting in his eyes. Beckham stood, placed a hand on his shoulder, and gave it a firm squeeze. Not pity, not sympathy, solidarity. Then he walked toward the door, pausing only to add, "This isn't over, Wayne. Not by a long shot." And with that, Beckham left him alone again, but not in the same way as before. Because for the first time in a very long while, Rooney didn't feel abandoned. He felt seen. The image of David Beckham's hand on his shoulder lingered with Rooney long after the charity match ended. That single gesture had unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. It was as if Beckham had reached through the fog and reminded him there was still a person buried under all the wreckage. But the moment he stepped out of the locker room, the noise of his life returned, like static, always present, always gnawing. He walked alone through the dimly lit car park, the chatter of fans fading behind him, and climbed into his car. The ignition clicked, the engine coughed to life, and with it came the memories, uninvited and unrelenting. They came the way they always did, like ghosts. Once he had been the wonder kid. 17 years old, stocky legs like pistons, hair flying as he smashed a thunderbolt past Arsenal's goalkeeper at Goodison Park. Commentators called him the future of English football. The tabloids crowned him the golden boy. For years the adoration never stopped. He had been unstoppable, unbreakable. Or so he thought. But legends don't crumble all at once. They erode slowly, piece by piece. The first cracks were small. Missed games through injury, late nights with a drink in hand, photographs of him leaving clubs at ungodly hours. People forgave him at first. "He's young, he's fiery," they said. "It's Rooney, he'll grow out of it." But the patterns repeated. For every hat trick, there was a scandal. For every headline praising his loyalty to Manchester United, there was another catching him stumbling out of a bar. He thought he could carry it all, the goals, the mistakes, the weight of a nation. But time is merciless. The body slows, the mind tires, and the cameras never blink. He remembered the sting of the booze. That night in 2010, after a dull draw at the World Cup, when he had walked off the pitch in South Africa and muttered into a camera, "Nice to see your own fans booing you. That's what loyal support is." It had slipped out, raw and bitter. By the next morning, every paper in England had splashed it across their front pages. He became the villain. The boy who once embodied England's hopes now embodied its disillusion. But the worst part wasn't the press. It wasn't the endless cycle of scandal and redemption. It was the silence at home. Colleen's eyes, tired and red from arguments that circled the same betrayals. The nights when she took the kids to her mother's house, leaving him alone with the echo of his own choices. He would sit in the kitchen at dawn, nursing a bottle of whiskey, wondering how the boy who had once played barefoot on the streets of Croxteth had turned into this man, bloated, bitter, and half a stranger to himself. When he tried to cling to football, injuries clawed him back. The hamstring, the ankle, the back. Each one left him slower, less sharp. Managers benched him, teammates passed him over in training drills. The whispers grew louder. He's finished. He should retire. But how do you retire from being yourself? Football wasn't just what he did. It was what he was. Without it, who was Wayne Rooney? So he clung to the game in any form he could. Coaching. Small stints managing clubs in chaos. Derby County, where the wages went unpaid, where he sat in cold offices trying to inspire players who had long since stopped listening. He gave everything, shouting himself hoarse on the touchline, but the results rarely came. The newspapers were merciless. Rooney out of his depth. The legend who can't lead. Every headline was another brick on his chest. He would lie awake at night in the small hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the tick of the clock. The doubts came like a chorus. You're not good enough. You were a shooting star. You've burned out. You should walk away before you embarrass yourself further. And some nights he believed them. Some nights, he even rehearsed the words he would say if he quit altogether. It was on one of those nights, half drunk, slumped in a chair, the glow of the television flickering across his face, that he saw Beckham on the screen. Not playing, but speaking at a gala in London. The man looked ageless, immaculate as always, talking about discipline, about giving back to the community, about how football was more than fame. Rooney scoffed bitterly. Easy for Beckham to say, isn't it? He had walked away at the top, untarnished, adored. But behind the bitterness, there was envy. And behind the envy, a longing. Because deep down, Rooney remembered when Beckham wasn't adored. He remembered 1998, when Beckham had been sent off against Argentina and the entire country had hung him out to dry. The effigies, the abuse, the ridicule. And yet Beckham had risen again, stronger, sharper, turning jeers into cheers. Rooney had admired that then. He still admired it now. Maybe that was why, when the envelope arrived weeks later, Rooney didn't throw it away. A simple invitation to a community football event. No sender's name, just the emblem of a children's foundation. He almost ripped it up. But something in him, something small, buried deep, hesitated. He folded it carefully and set it aside. In the days leading up to it, the old ghosts clawed at him. He drank more than he should have. He fought with Colleen again, words sharp and cutting. He almost didn't go. But that afternoon, with the rain tapping against the window, he pulled on a tracksuit and drove to the small stadium on the edge of Manchester. And there, among the patchy grass and the plastic chairs, he found something he didn't expect. Children chanting his name. For a fleeting moment, the bitterness cracked. Their voices weren't mocking. They weren't booing. They were cheering, pure, unfiltered, the way kids do when they see a hero, no matter how faded. It hurt as much as it healed. He wanted to tell them they were wrong, that their hero was long gone. But he couldn't. So he jogged onto the pitch, hiding his trembling hands in his pockets, hoping no one would see through him. Then Beckham arrived. And suddenly everything made sense. Beckham hadn't come to play a friendly game or pose for photos. He had come for him. Rooney realized it in the way Beckham's eyes locked onto his, in the firmness of that handshake, in the way he had shouted encouragement loud enough for the entire stadium to hear. He hadn't been trying to impress the crowd. He had been speaking directly to him. Rooney replayed it over and over in the days that followed. The weight of that hand on his shoulder, the calm in Beckham's voice, the reminder that he was still Wayne Rooney whether he believed it or not. But doubt is a stubborn enemy. And even after that charity match, the whispers inside him didn't disappear. He still drank. He still stared at the ceiling at night. He still wondered if Beckham had made a mistake in believing there was anything left worth saving. And yet, for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. The locker room smelled of sweat, damp fabric, and the faint metallic tang of rusted pipes. It wasn't glamorous, not like the dressing rooms Rooney had once known at Old Trafford or Wembley. The tiles were cracked, the benches creaked when you sat on them, and the flickering fluorescent light overhead gave everything a pale, unforgiving hue. Rooney sat slouched on the wooden bench, his head hanging low, his hands clasped between his knees. He didn't even bother to shower after the charity game. He just wanted to disappear. The door creaked open. Footsteps echoed against the tiles. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. He could feel it. Beckham carried an aura with him, calm yet commanding, like a tide washing into a room. Rooney exhaled heavily, rubbed his face with both hands and muttered, "You again." Beckham closed the door softly behind him, then leaned against the wall. He didn't speak immediately. He just let the silence stretch, filling the air until it became impossible to ignore. Finally, Beckham said, "You think I showed up today for the cameras? For the crowd?" Rooney barked out a bitter laugh. "Didn't you? That's what you do, isn't it? Step onto any pitch and people fall at your feet. You've never known what it's like to be this." He gestured vaguely at himself. The sagging body, the weary eyes, the tracksuit that looked more like a disguise than sportswear. Beckham tilted his head. "Haven't I?" Something in the tone made Rooney look up. Beckham's eyes weren't condescending. They weren't even pitying. They were steady, anchored in something older, something earned. "Do you remember France, '98? Beckham asked. Rooney frowned, caught off guard. Of course he remembered. Everyone remembered. Beckham's infamous red card against Argentina. The flick of the leg, the tumble of Simeone, the referee's hand pulling the card from his pocket. The way an entire nation turned on Beckham overnight. "I was 23, Beckham continued. His voice was low, measured, but it carried the weight of memory. "I walked off that pitch and I thought my life was over. When I got back to England, they hung effigies of me outside pubs. I got letters telling me to die. I couldn't leave my house without someone spitting at me. Do you know what it's like to be hated by millions for a single mistake?" Rooney swallowed hard. For the first time, he didn't have a quick retort. Beckham went on. "I thought I'd never play for England again. I thought I'd ruin my family, my career, my name. But I had a choice. I could drown in it, or I could remember why I started. Not for the fame, not for the headlines, for the ball at my feet, for the love of the game. That's what pulled me back." Rooney shifted uncomfortably. His chest felt tight, like Beckham's words were chiseling at the walls he had built around himself. "That's different," he muttered. You came back stronger. People forgave you. They always loved you in the end. I'm just a drunk who can't keep his head straight. They don't want me back. They want me gone." Beckham took a step closer. "Wayne, listen to me. You're not a drunk. You're not a headline. You're the kid who tore Arsenal apart at 17. You're the man who carried England on your shoulders more times than anyone will admit. You gave everything to this game, and yeah, you stumbled. We all stumble. But you don't stop being Wayne Rooney just because the papers say so." The words cracked something inside Rooney. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. He tried to laugh it off, to shrug like it didn't matter. But his body betrayed him. His hands trembled. He turned away, muttering, "You don't know what it's like. To wake up and feel empty. To look at yourself and hate what you see. To know you're the punchline in every pub across the country." "I do know," Beckham said firmly. Rooney whipped around, anger flaring. "No, you don't. You're David fucking Beckham. Global icon. Golden boy. You never had to crawl out of a bar at 3 a.m. with cameras flashing in your face. You never had your family nearly leave you because you couldn't keep yourself together. You..." His voice cracked mid-sentence. The rage collapsed into something smaller, more fragile. His chest heaved, and suddenly the words spilled out in a rush. "I don't even know who I am anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the corner. Rooney pressed his fists into his eyes, ashamed of the tears that forced their way out. He hadn't cried in front of anyone for years. Not managers. Not teammates. Not even Colleen. But here, in this crumbling locker room, the dam broke. And then Beckham did something unexpected. He crossed the room, sat down beside Rooney, and placed a hand on his back. Not a tap, not a pat, but a steady, grounding presence. For a long moment he didn't speak. He just let Rooney sob, shoulders shaking, breaths ragged. When Rooney finally managed to breathe again, Beckham said softly, "You're not finished. You're lost. That's different." Rooney shook his head. "Lost feels the same as finished." "Not if you've still got a map," Beckham replied. Rooney glanced at him, confused. Beckham smiled faintly. "This game, Wayne, is the map. The pitch, the ball, the kids who still scream your name. That's the way back. Not to the player you were. That chapter's closed. But to the man you're supposed to be now." Rooney stared at him, searching for sarcasm, for pity. There was none. Only belief. Pure, unshakable belief. The kind Rooney hadn't felt in himself for years. "You really think I can come back?" Rooney asked, his voice barely audible. Beckham nodded. Not as the teenager scoring screamers. Not as the captain dragging England to a tournament. But as Wayne Rooney, the mentor, the leader, the man who knows what it's like to fall and still stand up again. You can be that man. You already are. Something inside Rooney shifted. A flicker. A spark. Small, fragile, but real. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. For the first time in years, the idea of tomorrow didn't feel unbearable. Beckham rose, smoothing the creases from his shirt. He placed one last hand on Rooney's shoulder and said, "The only person who can write the rest of your story is you. Don't let the tabloids hold the pen." Then he walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back and added quietly, "You're not alone, Wayne. Not while I'm here." The door clicked shut. Rooney sat in the silence that followed, his chest still heaving, his eyes raw, but his heart just a fraction lighter. He looked down at his hands, scarred, rough, shaking, and for the first time in years, he wondered what they might hold if he trusted them again. The ghosts were still there. The headlines, the mistakes, the regrets, they hadn't vanished. But Beckham's words had carved a crack in the darkness, and through it, a sliver of light shone. The morning of the community football festival dawned gray and damp, the kind of Manchester day Rooney had known since childhood. Rain clung to the windows of his car as he pulled into the small car parked beside the pitch. A few months earlier, he would have dreaded this, would have hidden behind excuses, behind bottles, behind the thick fog of self-pity. But today was different. Today, something inside him stirred, restless and ready. He stepped out of the car and drew in the cool air. Kids were already milling around the muddy field, their boots splashing through puddles, their laughter rising above the drizzle. Volunteers bustled about, stringing banners between metal posts, setting up cones and goals. And scattered among the crowd were parents, grandparents, neighbors, all there not for the glamour of stars, but for the simple joy of football. Rooney adjusted his jacket and made his way toward the pitch. Whispers followed him. Heads turned. He braced himself for ridicule the way he always had. But what came instead froze him in place. "Rooney, Rooney." It started with one child, then two, then a chorus. Soon dozens of young voices rang out across the field. Their faces were alight, their arms waving, their eyes wide with awe. They weren't jeering. They weren't mocking. They were chanting his name with the same fervor once reserved for Old Trafford nights under the floodlights. For a moment, Rooney felt 17 again, the wonder kid with the world at his feet. His throat tightened. He lifted a hand in acknowledgement, awkward but genuine. The chants grew louder. The kids surged forward, eager for a handshake, a photo, a word. Rooney crouched to meet them, listening as they peppered him with questions. "Did it hurt when you scored that bicycle kick against City? What's it like to play for England? Can you teach me how to strike like you?" One boy, no older than 10, stood back from the crowd. He clutched a scuffed ball to his chest, his hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. His voice trembled as he finally stepped forward. "I play football because of you," he said. The words struck Rooney harder than any chant. He blinked at the boy, stunned. "Because of me?" The boy nodded earnestly. "I saw your goal against Newcastle on YouTube. My dad showed me. I wanted to be like you. I wanted to fight for the ball like you did." Rooney's chest ached. He swallowed against the lump in his throat, reached out and ruffled the boy's hair. "Then don't be like me," he said softly. "Be better." The boy beamed, clutching the ball tighter. Rooney stood, his eyes scanning the crowd, and that's when he saw him. Beckham, leaning casually against the barrier at the far end of the pitch, hands tucked into the pockets of a dark coat. He hadn't announced his presence, hadn't sought attention. He was just there watching, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Their eyes met across the distance, and Rooney felt the steadying weight of that gaze. Beckham gave the slightest nod as if to say, "This is it. This is who you are meant to be." The day unfolded in a blur of drills, laughter, and muddy boots. Rooney jogged alongside the kids, demonstrating passes, shouting encouragement, celebrating every scrappy goal as if it were scored in a final. His voice grew hoarse, his clothes soaked, but he didn't care. He felt alive in a way he hadn't for years. At one point, he joined a small-sided game, playing with the younger boys. The ball found its way to him at the edge of the box. Instinct took over. He swung his leg, and the strike was pure, low, powerful, curling into the bottom corner. The children erupted, swarming him in delight. For the first time in years, Rooney didn't feel the pressure of expectation. He felt joy, just joy. Later, as the event wound down, he found himself standing alone at the center circle. The rain had stopped, and a pale sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the field. He closed his eyes, listening to the distant hum of children still playing, their voices carrying the same love for the game that had once defined him. He felt a presence beside him. He didn't need to look to know it was Beckham. You see it now? Beckham asked quietly. Rooney opened his eyes, staring at the muddy pitch, at the kids chasing the ball with reckless abandon. Yeah, he said. His voice cracked, but it carried conviction. I see it. Beckham placed a hand on his shoulder, the same gesture as before but heavier now with meaning. The goals, the trophies, they fade. But this is forever. Rooney nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, he believed it. They stood in silence for a while, two men bound not just by the shirts they once wore, but by the scars of scrutiny, the weight of expectation, the redemption found in remembering why they ever played at all. When Beckham finally walked away, Rooney remained at the center circle. He looked down at the muddy ground beneath his boots, then up at the sky clearing above. His reflection stared back at him in the puddles, older, rougher, scarred. But not finished. Never finished. That night, back home, he sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. He flipped it open, uncapped a pen, and began to write. Not about tactics or formations. About kids. About discipline. About what he wished someone had told him when he was 10 years old with a ball at his feet. Page after page, the words poured out. Ideas for training sessions. Lessons about resilience. Notes about finding joy even in failure. For the first time in years, he wasn't haunted by the past. He was building something for the future. Weeks later, Rooney stood on the sidelines of a youth academy session he had agreed to lead. The kids wore mismatched kits, their boots caked with mud. They looked at him with wide eyes, waiting. He blew the whistle. The drills began. His voice filled the field, sharp and clear, but laced with encouragement. He saw himself in every one of them, the hunger, the fear, the dream. As the sun set behind the training ground, Rooney caught his reflection in the glass of the clubhouse. He barely recognized the man staring back. Not the bloated figure from the tabloids. Not the broken man from the pubs. But a coach. A mentor. A man with purpose. And somewhere in the distance, though unseen, he imagined Beckham watching, nodding once more. Because sometimes legends don't need saving. They just need reminding. Wayne Rooney had been reminded. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Final message of the story. Legends never die. They only need someone to remind them why they began.